Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and record too, just in case.
And I've got some doc stuff to talk about. So.
Okay. Do we have anything else? Can everybody see my screen now? Make it bigger.
Yes.
So, yeah, it looks like good topics.
Sydney, are you going to put anything on the agenda, or?
I have her as new.
I think that I'm line 9. 9. New PM member, I'm guessing is me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Take it away, Sean.
Oh, well, the big thing that's coming, don't have firm dates yet, but we are trying to move the PowerShell docs repo out of the PowerShell org in GitHub and into Microsoft Docs org in GitHub. There should be minimal impact to everybody, but it's a best practice that when we do that, you should change your Git remotes to point to the new location. GitHub will actually do redirection if you don't change, but eventually that redirection could go away. So it's always best to make that change. We'll have some announcements in the blogs and other places when we have firmer dates and some instructions on how to change your remotes and things like that. But wanted you to know that it's coming for those of you who contribute to Docs. And this will put us in a better position to get more of the Docs features in the PowerShell Docs document set. So that's it for now, I guess.
Awesome.
Let me just add one thing about the whole doc thing, because we mentioned on Twitter that my team, along with some PMs, were doing a docathon like 2 weeks ago now, or
Last week.
was it last week? I don't remember.
Week from
Yeah, so
Friday.
I think that was a good success. We didn't get us through as many doc issues as we wanted. There's some ramp up for a lot of the engineering team. I think we're planning on continuing doing some of those efforts so that we can actually work through our backlog of doc gaps. And then once we get through that, then the idea is that we'll have better processes in place so that we'll just not accrue a doc debt in the future. But hopefully people will start seeing much better documentation and filled up documentation going forward.
Yeah, so just another note on that. Like we recognize that there's been a lot of features coming in really hot, and you'll sort of see this as a theme of the rest of the call. I think is that we've accrued some debt across the spectrum of what we've been doing because we've been moving fast and trying to take as many PRs as we can, add as many features as we can. So this is just another one of those things where we know we have debt, we're working to burn down the debt, but we also know that we need to update our processes to be a little bit more sustainable going forward. So we'll be, doing, I think, a little bit more documentation. You may see some new procedural requirements from a pull request perspective in terms of spinning up documentation or helping out with documentation, whether that's you guys in the community or us sort of jumping in. But we're still ironing that out and just sort of keep your eyes peeled. But it's really, we don't want to make this situation any worse. And so we're going to be, taking the documentation and really the other sort of maintenance activities pretty seriously here over the next few months. So, but we'll likely be doing another one of these docathons pretty soon. And if anybody in the community is interested in helping out with documentation, we have a number of issues labeled as reference and by priority. So some of these are priority high, and then these would be unassigned issues would be the ones that we need help on that you could sort of pop up and claim. Yeah, we recognize that we need to do a lot of this work, and so we're going to continue to do that.
I'll just add, if anyone in the community wants to help out and find it difficult or don't know how to get started, give us that feedback, and we'll try to just make it easier for you to contribute to the docs.
And I'd be open to doing a webinar on getting started contributing to Docs.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so
Want to talk about recent releases?
Yeah, just came out with a couple.
So this week we shipped out 6.05 and 6.11 servicing releases. Those contain some security fixes. If you're on 6.0 or 6.1, you should definitely move to those versions. I expect that we'll have 6.2 Preview 2 out this week. And we also just shipped the Windows Compatibility Module 1.0 last night. Bruce should be publishing a blog after this meeting. Yeah. I'll work with him on that. Was anything else that was shipped? I think off the top of my head. We didn't have anything for script analyzer. Editors didn't have anything.
No, but yeah, I mean, just this is one of those things. You should just be able to update PowerShell core with your package managers. Just get the latest servicing release, just like you'd get anything else, and then. And then 6.2 Preview 2, I think is going to have a number of features. I know the changelog review is sitting in my queue, so I'm not exactly sure what ships in there. Does anybody on the call have any notable features that are coming out?
I think the big thing that made it into that is going to be on Linux systems where you have a case-sensitive file system. We got case-insensitive tab completion for the file system, so that's puts it on par with Windows and Mac OS. Should be a much better experience.
Awesome.
And to clarify, that's just for tab completion. So obviously, yes. If you don't get the casing right on a path that you're CDing into, it's not going to resolve. But if you use a lowercase letter and it's an uppercase and you hit tab, you're going to get the uppercase as a completion there. And is that a configurable feature, Steve?
No, it is just enabled by default. It's just going to basically provide the same. If the feedback from the customer say that they want it configurable, we can discuss that.
Okay.
Yes, always looking for feedback. One other thing that is in the Preview 2 is the experimental feature from Paul, so that if using implicit remoting and we kind of analyze your pipeline and everything can be on the parts of it that can be run remotely, then we send it to the remote side to process versus sending the object back and forth between the client and server. So that should net some significant perf improvements depending on how the server side is configured.
Yeah, so to say that a slightly different way, it's basically, hey, if I'm going and getting doing a get on, say, Exchange Online, right? And I want to query against that get, maybe I want to run a sort or a where object, instead of waiting for the entire object to come over to the local session, I'm going to go ahead and sort or filter that object on the remote session because the entire pipeline can be processed with commandlets that exist on the remote session. But we recognize that this is somewhat of a behavioral change, and in some edge cases may have an impact. So I will make sure that the notes have some instructions on how to enable that experimental feature. Do we have a sort of a registry, Steve, of the experimental features that can be flipped on in our config.json?
No, it's not. So if you just install 6.2 Preview 2, which would have the first experimental feature, just do get experimental feature dash list available. It'll show the ones. It's not obvious how to enable those. There's a set of commandlets that have an RC published on how to improve that experience, which will also remove the need for the list available, but that's for future discussion. Right now, yeah, we'll put some instructions on how to craft the configuration of JSON to enable that. One thing I just want to mention is that although the original intent of this is really to help out with the Exchange Online scenario, that's what we have a lot of people using implicit remoting. It won't work out of the box, as far as I know, as of today with Exchange Online, because they don't enable some of the sorting, filtering commandlets on the server side, which is needed for it to run entirely on the server side. However, if you do like a get pipe to a set and both those commands are on Exchange Online, then that should run it completely in the cloud versus piping the objects back and forth. So we are working with that team to figure out how to enable some of those commands so that if you're doing filtering, it should just all run on the server side.
Awesome. So just moving back down, I know we're sort of looping around here, but this Windows compatibility module, this is the one to jog everyone's memory that allows you to do a number of things that bring back some of the modules that we weren't able to make natively compatible with PowerShell core or are on down-level Windows systems where those updates don't exist to make those modules native to PowerShell core. Some of these include using localhost implicit remoting in order to call Windows PowerShell, as well as on down-level machines to copy CDXML or known compatible modules into the PowerShell core module path so that you're able to import them there. So, this is, we have sort of 60%-ish of the commandlets working natively in the latest 1809/October update that shipped this November. But if you're on a down level machine or you care about that last 40% of modules, then you should definitely check this one out. So I'll have a link published, and definitely look into Bruce's blog today. No idea why the thing is typing so slowly, but we'll figure it out. Okay. Cool. I think that covers the recent releases. Is that fair?
Yep.
Awesome. So I want to talk about RFCs briefly. Again, theme is sort of drilling down debt. We know that RFCs have been sitting out there for ages. We have a weekly committee call, but we've talked about opening that up in the past. Unfortunately, that sort of hasn't gotten off the ground really. I've sort of I took a recording a couple times, and there's just sort of a mixing, I think, of business conversation and technical conversation, and I think sometimes people do want to be a little bit more direct in a way that is not necessarily as I don't want to say it violates like code of conduct or anything like that, but sometimes we just speak in very blunt terms in the committee call. So I'm still trying to figure out how we can possibly provide some minutes or notes from those. But we've basically been using that entire time to work on issues that are tagged as review committee or pull requests that are blocked on committee review. And because of that, we don't really get the deep dive drill downs on RFCs that we'd like to have. And they've just sort of always fallen by the wayside as the lowest priority. So what we've done is we've spun up another weekly meeting that's an hour and a half long to just talk about RFCs. And these ones I am taking better notes and responding to RFCs. We started with RFC 2, and we've worked our way through RFC 3 and 4. And we may have a better priority at some point, but right now we're really just trying to kick out some of this older stuff and either accept it or not, so that community can implement it. Or in some cases, we just simply need to revise the RFC to reflect the state of the world as it currently exists. So I think you're going to see a lot more activity there. Please just be patient with us. We're trying to get to all these things. We recognize that the community has written some phenomenal RFCs, and we do want to get those closed out. This is the only way we know how to do that. But if anybody has any suggestions or feels that we're not going about this in the right approach over the course of the next month or two, please speak up and let us know how you would like us to be doing things a little differently. But yeah, you should see a lot more activity in the PowerShell RFC repo. I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Have we been getting anything?
There is one question about the dial-in. Apparently it doesn't work from the United Kingdom. You want to just double check that something didn't expire.
Okay, I am probably going to investigate, just so everybody here knows. I'm not exactly sure how to do the switchover, but I'd like to investigate switching to a new technology for these calls. I don't know. We've been sort of moved over to a quote-unquote Teams only or Teams first organization. So Skype is sort of in this mode where it is a little bit limited and directs me to a lot of Teams behaviors, and so I think ideally we'd like to move there, but I recognize that it may have some problems when it comes to guest access as well, and possibly dial-in calls. So I think by the new year I'd like to start communicating that we might migrate the call over to some new technology, and we'll if anybody has some suggestions for those things, please let me know. So yep, just use Discord. Might not be the worst idea. I know we have the PowerShell virtual user group on Discord. I use Discord pretty heavily too, so maybe that is the right approach. But we'll look into Teams first, because I think we do want to have some of the sort of meeting notes and recording integration and that sort of thing. But I'll do an analysis and let everybody know. Awesome. Currently,
I didn't see any other questions.
Okay. Yep, those are all good stuff. So drilling down RFC debt, taking better notes on conversations, and
one thing I'll just add, because the focus of the last discussion was really about drilling down on existing RFCs. I'm also trying to get my team anyways, to craft more small RFCs for new features, because we can actually use that as a way to build documentation from versus the code. So
yeah,
actually
we've
could
noticed
more
that for
operative.
some of the features that we added, like experimental features, that had really good RFCs, were much easier to document because everything was basically written out already. So that's a pattern that we'd like to follow in general. So we can say Teams, Discord, etc. Okay. Awesome. PowerShell team will be authoring more small RFCs. Awesome. Anybody have any questions there? General feedback, it feels slow, not just because it's been low priority, it's designed to be quite slow. Yes, so, I mean, that is the case. Like, it was designed to be slow. I will note that, when we designed the RFC process, we were in a world where a lot of code was being checked into Windows without a lot of conversation or oversight. It's not to say that people weren't reviewing the code, but there was often a disconnect between people having input on the design and the code being checked in. We wanted to make sure that the community and all stakeholders are able to give their feedback before we go and make a change or implement something that we're locked into for a long period of time. One of the things that we've brought up in the past, and this is certainly the case, is that we'd like for experimental features to become a way to sort of preempt or sort of work in parallel with the RFC process. So the idea would be that if you have a great feature and maybe the commandlet names haven't been hashed out or the design hasn't been well received or it's controversial possibly, people in the community are saying, oh, that's a breaking change that's going to kill me, and other people are saying no, this is behavior that we all need. We can hide that behavior behind an experimental flag before the RFC is approved in order to get real world understanding of how that behavior is going to impact different scenarios. And so this is something that we're hoping to leverage a lot more in the future to again, I don't want to say circumvent the RFC process, but to sort of increase our ability to be agile and experiment without impacting the sort of long-term viability of the platform, if that makes sense. Thank you, Mark. We've got PS Community Call. That's awesome. Appreciate it. That is one that I should have stood up a long time ago. That makes a lot of sense. So I will say RFC process designed to be slow, to give all stakeholders opportunity to provide input, experimental. That's what I want. Features help accelerate that process. And I'll flesh these out a little bit more before I publish them. Hopefully everybody's been happy with the roughly 24-hour turnaround I've had on community calls in the last few. So I'm getting better at making that happen. Cool. Are we okay moving on to 6.2 priorities, Steve?
Well, I think Joel had a small question about a specific pull request adding binary parsing. So I think it isn't always black and white whether an RFC is required. I also feel like people should recognize that RFCs don't have to be these big heavyweight documents. Even if you just have like the intent, motivation, and maybe like some sample PowerShell or show what the user experience would be, that already provides a lot of good context so that people can provide feedback before you implement something, and then you have to change the code a lot based on the feedback. Since this PR already exists, I haven't looked at this one in detail, so I can't say whether or not it would make sense at this time to author an RFC. I think the future it might be more helpful. Without looking at this, it's hard to make the call.
I will say this is a prime case of, if you don't provide a solution for people to get their job done, and in this case, quote unquote, getting your job done means, community providing new features and functionality to PowerShell, then people are going to circumvent that process and sort of push their way through, irrespective of what you've codified. So this is, I don't want to. I think it's unfair for us to say, and I'm speaking off the cuff here, and people on the call are welcome to disagree with me, but I think it's unfair for us to say, given the way that we've treated the RFC process thus far, that small to medium-sized items need to go through the RFC process before they can be accepted. But on the flip side, I think that things that really have an impact on either changing existing behavior or in really fundamental aspects of the language or engine really should go through an RFC. And I think that there may be a couple instances over the next month or two where we do kick out a couple of these PRs and say, or we may simply say, hey, this is fine to hide behind an experimental flag until an RFC is crafted and approved, and maybe the RFC is just the sort of bureaucratic switch on taking that experimental feature flag off. But I think we need to have an answer here, and it's something that I want to take back to our committee meetings and get a crisper answer and consensus from everyone on. Does anybody have anything to add there?
Let me just add two things. I'm hoping the community can leverage the experimental feature flag more. So even if you author an RFC, you don't wait for that to be fully approved to move forward with implementation. So with the experimental flag, basically it means, hey, just something we want people to try out, get the feedback. Don't depend on it because the design may change. That's why I'm having some more of my team members do stuff behind the experimental feature flag, so get that feedback. It's much easier to get the feedback, real feedback, when it's in code versus just written as a spec. So try to leverage that more.
Awesome. Does that make sense to people on the call, I think? Cool. Got a thumb. I like a thumb. Awesome. Okay, moving on to 6.2 priorities. Again, I think we've said this before, but we know we have some debt. And a lot of this debt is unfortunately not really seen by you guys because it's about the sort of internal processes and requirements that we have for shipping officially supported Microsoft software. And in addition to that, we have a large matrix of platforms, distributions, versions, architectures that we support. And we're doing lots of manual push-button testing to test those platforms when it comes time to do a release. And similarly, actually building and packaging the release is a fairly manual process that is introducing a lot of pain and churn into all these releases. And when we're supporting multiple branches, we shipped a 6.05, we shipped a 6.11, we're now shipping a 6.2 preview 2. That cost really starts to compound itself. And so one of the things that we're really focusing on over the course of the next few months is to build better release automation and make sure that those processes are more sustainable, automated, and quick, basically. I will defer to Steve, I think, to say some thoughts on how this might be generalized a little more in the future.
Yeah, so I think the goal I kind of set for my team is I want to get to a place where if we had to, we could release every night. Because every day, whatever the case may be. But presumably like every evening, tests get kicked off. Because this week we already had we'll have 3 releases for PowerShell Core, right? We got the 6.0, 6.1, 6.2. And going forward, even if 6.0 goes out of service, we're going to have 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 kind of thing. So we're always going to have these overlapping releases concurrently. And right now there's a lot of manual effort. It's painful. But it's necessary so that we can protect our customers. So the idea here is really, now that Azure DevOps Pipelines is mature enough, it seems like they have the features we need so that we can actually depend on them, along with some other things that we're looking at to build out an automated pipeline. We're building a bunch of tooling. The idea is that we want to generalize this so it's not PowerShell Core specific. So anyone who wanted to leverage or is familiar with PowerShell, they want to marry PowerShell with CI, they can reuse our tooling, and we'll have blogs and we'll talk about it at some of the conferences. Jim is kind of driving this overall, and I think he's done a fine job so far. So far, but it is a challenge because we need to support Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. In the future, want to cover stuff like Raspberry Pi. Want to cover stuff, Alpine. Alpine's an interesting one, like all the ARM processing. So yeah, it's a difficult problem. I think it's something we need to solve. I don't know if we'll get 100% of the way there, but any improvements will definitely help out. And again, we'll have more information about this later. And the idea is that any tooling that we produce will be open source and shared with the community.
Yeah, do we have Jim in the room actually?
Yes. He's just off camera.
Awesome. Well, I'm taking the notes, so I'm not looking at the camera, unfortunately. But yeah, I think Jim, we've decided, we're sort of scoping to a certain set of distributions and versions today, right? We've got a limited set that we're starting with here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going after what we believe are the most high volume platforms, but essentially what we're trying to do is automate the gap between what our CI system does and the fact that we release on 13 or 14 different platforms. CI systems really only covered 3 platforms, and we support 9 different Linux distributions and 10 different Windows distributions and 3 different Mac distributions or 2 different Mac distributions. And we don't have that automated enough yet. So we're trying to fill the gap there so we can automate the whole thing and have a much better grasp of quality for all of the platforms rather than just the chosen CI platforms.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to call out here, this is, again, I think speaks to the enormous complexity of what we're trying to do here. And you guys have to remember that a lot of the products that Microsoft ships, we have entire teams dedicated to the build, test, and release pipelines for those products. And in this case, the same people building the features are the people building the test infrastructure and the build infrastructure. So, we have to be smarter about the way that we spend our time. I do want to call out here that this is a place where telemetry has really helped us. So it's allowed us to identify the top platforms that people are using, and so we can make sure to target those as the sort of beachheads for this initiative, and to give those platforms the earliest uptick in terms of stability and stability and reliability. So. We may have, I don't want to open this one totally up right now, but we may have some additional telemetry that we may want to introduce in the future. We're having those conversations about how to do that in a tactful and visible way, and also make sure that anything that we add is highly valuable, and that the community understands what we're using that telemetry for. So we may have more to say on that at the next community call, but just keep in mind for now that the stuff we've implemented is very useful to us, and we are using it in meaningful ways.
Hey, Joey, there was a request from Ryan earlier. If you could just scroll up the notes a little bit so you're not having it in the middle, so you can kind of...
Oh, yeah, my apologies. It's better.
Oh, you don't have to go all the... Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Awesome. I sort of tabled... I'm going to table PowerCode's question about performance and breaking changes.
Yeah, we'll get to it. I think we have time.
Yeah. But I'm going to continue forward on 6.2 priorities. Obviously, community PRs, we're going to continue to take, but I think you're not going to see a huge influx of features from us in this time frame, given this sort of release automation initiative.
Yeah, there will be a couple of small things as people have time or want to do off hours, So I think in the next preview 3, we'll have the experimental feature for the abbreviation expansion. And then I think after that one gets in, either I or someone else can maybe look at the fuzzy matching. I think that's also interesting. But these will just be like little small things. We don't have any major new features being planned in PowerShell core itself. As you always mentioned, we have these other things right now. So once we get the release pipeline automated, so that should help us move faster. And now that we can leverage experimental feature flags, we can also move faster because we can actually put some stuff out there that people can try without going through like a whole waterfall kind of process.
Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar with the abbreviation expansion, this is basically if you have a commandlet that's really long. Do you have a good example, Steve, or should I just pull up Azure here?
Oh, any Azure command.
Yeah. Let me see here. Get command module AZ star. So like if I take a really long one like this, right? Update ADL analytics compute policy. The idea is that you could say U-AACP and hit tab, and that should complete to update ADL analytics compute policy. And so that's an experimental feature that Steve's been working on, and then there may be some fuzzy matching in the future as well. Like if I say update, analytics, I think is that the idea, Steve, that would tab
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So there's possibilities here. Again, this is all in tab completion, so that this isn't a breaking change. We're not introducing anything in anyone's namespaces, and these should be configurable features that people can turn on and off. But we do think there's a lot of opportunity to make typing a lot quicker for people, given that these commandlet names keep growing. So. Cool.
I think in terms of other priorities, I think we expect to have another script analyzer release with some rules to help move between Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core as well as from Linux to Windows, non-Windows and Windows, including Mac OS. We'll have hopefully a release of Editor Services 2.0 with PS Readline.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue actually into introducing one of our newest PM team members, who I believe is in the room here. So,
Yes.
you want to take it away, Sydney?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Sydney. I've been at Microsoft for almost 2 months now, but this is my first community call. So thought I would take a couple minutes just to share with you guys what I'm working on. So right now I'm working on PowerShell Gallery, PowerShell Get, and then the editor services PowerShell VS Code extension, that sort of area. So those are my two main areas of focus right now. Yeah, so I guess one of my sort of open questions right now is how to best communicate to all of you guys what items are sort of up next in our internal prioritization queue. So like these are issues that aren't currently in progress and can't promise anything on, but that we see as important and hope to and plan to get to next. So some ideas for that are like GitHub labels or GitHub projects, but any feedback on the best way to communicate that would be great. Yeah, that's about it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sydney. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of stuff that we have planned in these areas, and I think that yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we have planned here. I think there's a lot of stuff people have really been demanding in all these areas. I know specifically in the editor services, VS Code stuff, script analyzer. We want to continue increasing performance, reliability. There's been a lot of people on the team that have been working very hard to figure out how we do a big refactor of a lot of this code in order to achieve that. I know that one of the big features as well is PS Readline support that people have been asking for a very long time. I assure you that we are continuing to work on that, and that it is very non-trivial. I think it's is it Bergmeister? Can anybody confirm that in the room that's been really involved in that effort?
Patrick. Seemingly
Patrick.
Science.
Seemingly Science, excuse me. Sorry about that. So Patrick
Has been involved in other things.
Bergmeister's been involved in a lot of other stuff. Yeah, this is there's so much code flying, I just can't keep it all straight anymore. So that stuff's been making progress. So just bear with us, and Sydney will have somewhere soon that you guys can sort of peek into the roadmap of what's being built there. So we've got one GitHub project using GitHub labels. I'm going to work with her a little bit because I think having tried projects in the past, I'm not sure that they introduce a ton of value, but I think there's an opportunity for labels to be well formed there, and we'll sort of investigate a couple different workflows and float the ideas with you guys when we have that. So this is one question from Kirk to Sydney on whether we're making PowerShell Get easier to use, remove the annoying errors, fix the update all scenario, fix the performance, etc. Also, FX cop-like support for binary modules and PS module analyzer.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Like, absolutely trying to target our most frustrating pain points is very high in our prioritization right now, especially around installing modules and updating modules are really target places right now to try and get rid of some of those annoyances or frustrating pieces.
I guess we'll hear more from Sydney in the future, hopefully the near future.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome.
So Alexander had a quick question. So out grid view and the GUI stuff is certainly something that's always on top of my mind. It is not part of the 6.2 plan. Unfortunately, I don't know whether or not it will be part 6 or not, but it's something we will eventually get to. I'll just say that, I guess.
I will say this is one of those things that is going to be easier to implement from a Windows perspective, especially when we have NetCore 3.0, because we're bringing back WinForms and WPF. So I believe that some of that stuff is just going to start working natively once we have a lot of those APIs back in the .NET Core 3 Windows compatibility pack. But I think we'd like to have a long-term cross-platform solution. I believe that that's probably a sort of HTML or WebSockets type implementation, but it's going to be very non-trivial, and it's sort of been brought to my attention in the last 6 to 9 months or so. The great extent to which Outgrid View is not just used for static data, but actually for selecting data in the middle of a pipeline. And then that's something that's especially popular in the DBA tools community. So we will... we'll continue looking into that, but I think in the short term, you should see that stuff just sort of pop in as is once we have those APIs back on Windows. Fair. If anybody can read the chat, if there's a response there, that'd be great.
Yes, there's something from Edwin, which we can ignore for now. So everyone knows Edwin is the engineering manager for Gallery, Get, Cloud Shell, and other things. I'm joking with him. He's a good guy. The other thing I want to mention is 6.2 priorities, because I think we did already kind of disclose this at both Ignite and PowerShell Conference Asia, is that we are working on PowerShell core support in Azure Functions. Nothing to announce other than we are working on it. Yeah, so it's happening. But that's part of the effort my team is also spending time on.
Yeah, so this is we demoed this at Ignite. If anyone has used functions in the past or looked into functions and was blocked on its usage, I would really appreciate it if you could reach out to me. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to speak my email on the call because I really don't want to get blanket blown up on the...
they can send you private messages on Twitter.
They can, but I will say that I found out about a month ago that my messages weren't set up the way that I thought they were, and I've had a black hole of pending messages from people that I don't follow, and I feel really bad about that. So I think the best thing to do would be to ping me at either raise your hand in this call, like right now, just say in the chat like I'm interested, or ping me at joey.ilo at microsoft.com. This is how you spell my last name. You guys are smart enough to figure this out.
They can see your name on the chat window.
Oh yeah, duh, right? Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, just ping me, and there may be some opportunities to test this thing out. But yeah, we are working on this from the PowerShell team side. So this is a big priority for us. We want to make sure that this is done right. If anybody's played with the V1 experimental in the past, it was a little bit of a sort of grafted on solution, and we're doing this a lot more natively. So definitely reach out and we'll see if we can give you a chance to try it. So. Cool.
There's a question about Azure Automation. At this point, there's no plans to add PowerShell core support into Azure Automation. That's something we can revisit in the future. I only have so many resources.
Yeah, so today, Azure Automation. There's a great talk at Ignite that was presented by the Azure Automation and Azure Functions teams. I can to do and sort of link in the chat here. But let me see, to do link to Ignite talk. But there are some functional differences between the things. I don't want to dive too deep into this now, but there's automation is going to be better for long running tasks, hybrid agent scenarios where you're attaching to an on-prem or you're looking to manage on-prem VMs or systems via this hybrid agent worker, and then obviously there's all the DSC stuff that comes with it, the ability to do runbooks, etc. So again, I would defer to that Ignite talk as sort of the primary resource for understanding those differences. But we think that these things do exist side by side. So awesome. Deploy AZ to Azure Automation. What do you mean by that? The AZ module?
The AZ module. There's work happening by the Azure Automation team to support that. Right now, they only support the Azure RM stuff.
And to answer your question, Ryan, yes, the runtime and functions will be v6. Awesome.
Yeah, I want to make sure we give time for Stefan's.
Yep, definitely. I think I had no more stuff on the agenda, so this is great. So the question here is around, how are we? Basically, I would rephrase it as how are we thinking about the trade-off between I cannot type when it's so slow, between performance and breaking changes. So I will start by saying that I essentially have a litmus test. Oh, you're okay. I will take that feedback, Alexander. Thank you. So I have a litmus test that I like to use when we're having committee calls about breaking changes, and that sort of is essentially asking two qualitative questions. One of those is, to what extent do we believe that this breaking change is going to negatively impact the community? So we look at GitHub. We have a very large corpus of PowerShell scripts that we've collected over the years that we analyze, and we try to see how many people are doing this pattern, how many people are depending on this behavior. Sometimes that's a little harder to analyze, but sometimes it's a parameter that we're looking to remove or something like that. And so we can understand pretty quickly the sort of order of magnitude of to what extent this break might affect people out in the wild. It's an imperfect process, but it's I think the best we got. On the flip side, we ask ourselves, okay, to what extent is this going to provide value to members of the community and to people using PowerShell core? And so we've rejected some breaking changes in the past where there's really just an effort to reach consistency, right? A lot of times people have sort of belief that we should correct some of the inconsistencies that have occurred in PowerShell over the course of the last few years as different team members have applied different principles to designing features. But often in those cases, introducing the consistency doesn't actually provide any new functional value to the members of the to the PowerShell users. So this litmus test, we just sort of look at these two magnitudes again from a qualitative perspective and just try to understand how they trade off against each other. So I think in that case, and I believe, Stefan, if I'm not mistaken, we've actually taken some of the performance changes that you've introduced that were partial breaking changes, and I think we rejected one or two as well because we believed that the impact for breaking was very high. I think when we're talking about order of magnitude 10x, 100x, 1000x improvements, that's a huge value that we're providing in the community. And I think that in those cases, we're going to look at how we can possibly mitigate the aspects of those breaking changes. But oftentimes we're going to be okay taking that. I think that similarly, sometimes we don't know exactly to what extent we're breaking people in the community. And to that end, I think we should hide some of these performance improvements or any improvements really behind experimental feature flags. Obviously, that sort of limits the extent to which you can analyze whether edge cases are hit in those breaks. because people have to opt into those experimental feature flags. So I don't know. We may investigate sort of like a Chrome dev channel like experience where we turn on some set of the experimental features by default in only preview releases or something like that, and then sort of decide whether or not we should keep them on when we go to GA, or whether we just keep that on in preview branches only. I don't know. There's lots of different ways that we can experiment here, but that's sort of the way I'm thinking about it. But I encourage everybody else in the room to sort of speak up with their thoughts as well.
No, I think I agree with you, Joey. I mean, another example where we know will be a big breaking change that we talked about, but we have no plans to implement soon, is like a new file system provider. So the current provider has a number of issues besides having really complex code. It's also got performance issues, and it actually has a lot of intrinsic expectations about being on NCFS. And then at some point, if we want to introduce a V2 file system provider, it is definitely a breaking change, especially if we fix a lot of annoyances that exist today that are expected to be there now. And the question is, how do we, if we provide that to be behind a experimental feature flag, how do we ever flip the bit so that that becomes the default and maybe the other becomes optional? I don't think we've completely thought this through yet because we haven't had a real situation come up yet. I think if Stefan is going to put in the effort to basically re-implement PS Object so that it's performant, I think initially, I think definitely you can go ahead and do that and put it behind an experimental feature flag. I think the committee can certainly have a discussion on how stuff goes from experimental to non-experimental when they break, and whether or not we want to support opt-in, opt-out, that kind of stuff. It's not black and white. It's going to be all shades of gray. It'll probably be by case.
There's a reason we have in our breaking changes contract the likely gray area and the unlikely gray area. Most stuff falls into those, right? But yeah, I think there's too much opportunity here to not try and implement some of this stuff in an experimental fashion and start using it. I think if you get people that are going, oh my God, this is like so much better to have a file system provider too, or this new PS Object implementation, then I think the answer will just sort of become clear over time when people are begging us to turn it on by default. So, yeah. Cool. Do we have any more questions in the chat while I'm typing up these notes, Steve?
Not a question. A statement from Kirk about a specific issue. I'll have to look into. I don't know if I've looked into those. If the request is more about additional documentation, I know that we already have a huge gap on the SDK documentation that's in our backlog. We'll get around to it hopefully this calendar year. Fortunately, at least in the United States, half of December is kind of gone for the holidays and New Year's and whatnot. People like to try. A lot of people are not from natively this area, so they travel home to meet their families and whatnot. So things will slow down in December. Yeah.
Yep. To that end, I should say I think it's probably pretty likely, Steve, if I'm just looking at a calendar here, that we will. I know we didn't have one last month either, but given that it's falling on the 20th, this is probably a community call that will have to be canceled as well. So I'm just calling that out to people now. We will, say that on Twitter, and I will make sure to post in the RFC in advance this time to say that it's canceled. I apologize for last time. It was a combination of poor planning on our part, knowing that everybody was going out of town, and then I got really sick and was bedridden the day that the community call landed. So we'll be a little more proactive on this one, but I think we can go ahead and just say that the community call scheduled for December 20th is not going to be on. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Cool. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and continue typing up these notes. Does anyone have any more general questions, things that have been bugging them over the course of the last couple months? Fantastic.
And again, just a quick reminder, I think we're out of time for this one, but for future calls, I want to make sure we understand, this call is not just about PowerShell Core itself. We do have people from other projects either in the room or calling in. listening. So if you have questions about the PowerShell ecosystem that's owned by the broader PowerShell team, definitely bring it up, and we'll get the right folks involved if they're not here or not involved. 7.0. If we do our job right, we won't have a 7.0.
Yeah, I'm unclear about how our branch strategy is going to look like when NetCore 3.0 comes into play, which I posted in the chat here. But
I don't know if
there
Michael
are
is on the phone, but I'm sure he would like a 7.0. And then we can just break everything.
yeah, I mean, you guys have to remember, like, regardless of, I know this conversation's come up a lot, like, can we just make, like, the fully consistent, everything's fixed, PowerShell core build? We're really trying to leverage back compat as much as possible. We're trying to avoid a sort of Python 2 versus 3 kind of split where it takes a decade for people to adopt the new one, and only after they're beaten over the head multiple times and told that they're not going to be supported on 2.x branches and that sort of thing. I'd like to do this a little bit more gradually and just, again, keep applying our litmus test of how we want to do breaking changes and when we should, sort of rev the major version. But I think there could be some changes to our support lifecycle in the future, not for anything that currently exists, but we may have to sort of revise our branching and support strategy to align a little more closely with .NET Core, and the opportunity to do that maybe around the 3.0 timeframe. So we'll continue speaking to that as sort of things come up. PowerShell X, yeah. Skip to 10.
Anniversary edition.
We'll have the the PowerShell March 2019 update shipping in April. GeoVerse stages in the backlog. Yeah, it's a big work item. I'm not sure that we're going to have a chance to get to it in the short term. More granular control over security lockdown, unlocking specific types, ACL or firewall. I would encourage you to file an issue that sort of outlines the kinds of scenarios.
Joey, we're going to lose the room. We got another set of people coming in.
I can continue talking to them for a minute. So thanks, everybody. See you later. So yeah, please file an issue there, the feedback feature in Docs that Sean is referring to here, I'll speak to very briefly. If you go to the bottom of any issue or any Docs page, we now have integrated feedback with GitHub and the product feedback. So you're actually able to go down here. And you can say sign in to give documentation feedback. That feedback will actually show up in this page and will stay in sync with the PowerShell docs issue that gets created as a result of that. If you have feedback on the product itself, these are people who might not be as well acquainted with the way that we do feedback across different distros. This will take you right into PowerShell to create a new issue. We've actually got a PR that I think Steve should be merging any day now here that will give you sort of the templates that you see in other repos like VS Code PowerShell. So we'll have sort of a fork of different ways that you might want to file issues, and these things will say like, hey, if you're trying to file an issue on Windows PowerShell, you should go over to user voice and that sort of thing. So we'll have one of these that people land on instead, and then it'll be a little bit more of a guided experience. But yeah, we think that this experience in docs.microsoft.com will create an opportunity for people that aren't as familiar with the open source process to participate and make sure that their voices are being heard. So everyone have a great day. I'm going to go ahead and cut the call here, but really appreciate everyone joining, and we will see you in January. Have a good one, everyone.